Before we get going in the next part of the program, a quick clarification. While I'm conducting the interview and the questions are mine, the content of this portion of the event shouldn't be considered editorial in nature. Our guest would have been in this program anyway. She is fantastic and reflects the content that we care about. She also happens to overlap with the organization sponsoring today, so we just want to be on the safe side of things. She was just 22 years old when she was appointed to this position in 2016, making her the youngest minister in the world. Shamma Mazrui, great to see you, the youth minister in the UAE. We have known each other for a number of years, and I just wanted to say for a moment how I think when it comes to this question of Arab youth and what they aspire to, from the time I first met you at NYU Abu Dhabi, I'm interested in what the big challenges have been in the Arab world that you think the youth have been responding to and getting and dealing with.
First of all, it's an honor to join you today on this interview, and it's been an important election week for the US. And I want to extend, first of all, my congratulations to President-elect Biden and VP-elect Harris for a really historical victory of a historical election with the highest voter turnout on record. And I think the first ever woman, African-American and Asian-American elected VP. Before just going to your point on what has changed with the Arab youth, I want to emphasize that there's something that's very important, and there's a significant challenge. It's baffling to me because if you look at the Arab Youth Survey data from 2016 up to now, how widespread youth have been sidelined in national youth strategies when they are central to a nation's present. We all know more than 65% of this region are under the age of 35. The Arab Youth Survey demonstrates the impact this has on a long-term erosion of hope, of trust, of opportunity, of contribution erosion. And we've seen that youth want to use their voice one way or the other, and youth are worthy of having their voices heard and needs met. And the question, just to go back to you, is it's up to governments to choose how inclusive they are of young people and the outcomes that they are willing to accept continuously. And if governments don't listen and engage, this poses an impossible dilemma for youth. Youth need to be set in conditions to thrive, not strive to have their voices heard to no avail. And that's why data is power, and that's why the Arab Youth Survey is so important. And to the youth watching us today, I say we see you, and we understand that you are assets. You and the world need your governments to see you as assets as well.
Well, I think one of the questions then is that you had said previously that you're happy in the UAE that the National Youth Strategy was not something that had been archived and was on a shelf and was more organic and real in dealing with aspirations essentially in real time, which is what I find so valuable about this study. But as you look at COVID, as you look at the employment crisis, as you look at evolving attitudes, on faith as a door opener, not faith as a restrictor. I think one of the questions is, with you as a representative of that, how is that world evolving for them, and what demands do they have that need to be heard?
I love your point. You mentioned maybe one of the findings of the survey, which I think is very interesting. It's an amazing reveal from the survey, Steve. Arab youth prioritize their faith and they want religious reforms to meet modern times. And it's a yes and, not an either or. And I wasn't surprised because I see every day how central faith is to Arab youth. And also how much they realize that religion is the root of so much conflict in our region. We have to be honest, even in our societies. And one reason is that I believe that youth are deeply committed to the core tenets of their faith that are more universal, like peace, like tolerance, like inclusion, like hope, like love. These are qualities that youth want to express. And they want their religions to rise to these kind of modern demands. And what this survey is showing us is that they're willing to say it and they're willing to fight for it. So for Arab youth, faith is a core component and part of our identity. And its values exhibit what we know and what we see and what we experience in the world. And because we are global citizens connected to everyone through our smartphones, and we don't have the same biases and prejudice of maybe older generations. So one, I think, very important point is the Arab Youth Survey shows that youth's view of religious institutions and the need for reform is a high priority. And they've expressed it very clearly. And it's up to governments to upgrade that.
One of the things that really struck me, and again, I've been reading this survey for a number of years, is that these young people are digital natives. They get their news and communicate online digitally as opposed to always looking at government sources. They are risk takers. They want to have jobs. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want the environment for that. There's a kind of fluidity that they'd like to have. But if you look at everything from the UAE, which just sent a probe to Mars, to some of the parts of the Middle East that look like they've, essentially struggling with medieval age issues. It's an incredible contrast in scenes in the Middle East. And I'm just interested, as you kind of look at modernity and modernity being embraced and science being embraced in this, how do you deal with this as a minister in a cabinet, embracing these more fluid, digital, science-driven ideas in a world that's still struggling with a lot of issues from the past?
You raise a very important point. The UAE's investment in youth leads to literal earth-shattering projects, like you mentioned, maybe our Mars mission. By the way, it's led by youth, and coincidentally, I think it's very linked to Hope. And by the way, the mission is called Hope Mars Mission. But the bottom line is, in the UAE, we believe how we hope determines our future, and our relationship with the future determines how we all live today. Putting young people at the helm of our Mars mission or our space centers is a real shift towards hope. And the important thing that when you look at the Arab Youth Survey, it's very interesting to see. It tells you that governments must carve new paths to empower their citizens to navigate new kinds of changes. In my 4 years currently in the youth portfolio, I see firsthand the difference, Steve, that including youth in every step of government makes. By de-siloing youth in sports, by connecting youth directly to leaders at all levels, by including them in every platform, we're creating a currency of hope. And we've discovered concrete evidence that radically including youth creates youth hope for them. And it generates beliefs and behaviors and results that open doors wider for more inclusion. Now, when I looked at the survey this year, I saw a great loss of hope in Arab youth throughout the MENA region. And I saw as well a clear narrative and case for real hope. And that's what our region needs the most. Hope is so important because it's the wings that are going to give our young people the ability to take flight. And we don't live in easy times, as you mentioned, whether it's COVID, but we do live in an amazing time where there's more opportunities than ever before. And with so much darkness, there's so much light. And I see that light as the light of Arab youth. But the issue is it's a big call on all governments. In the UAE, it's calling other governments to invest in their youth as assets, not as liabilities. And if Arab youth lose hope, then we lose the power of our most valuable asset. And the antidote to losing hope is a formula youth have already shared with us, and they've shared with the world. They need governments, they need leaders to create nations of hope. And that's very simple. It's by listening to youth, by taking action, by thinking about how do you encourage young people to believe that they can make a difference? How do you give them a substantive seat at the table? How do you integrate their voice into real influence in policy and decision making?
Another thing that has changed recently is the UAE has broken the map apart in the region, the Abraham Accords, normalizing with Israel. When I launched this program a year ago for The Hill, and it was my favorite one last year, which is to kind of, look at not only Arab youth aspirations, but kind of look at what American youth wanted as well. And the striking thing is that in a lot of the areas it was so similar. Jobs, economic opportunity, swim in the digital lane, looking at a lot of these various issues. So the similarities were abounding. Now that Israel and Israeli youth are becoming part of the project, and we have a participant from Israel here today, how do you think Arab youth are going to embrace or not embrace the fact that there's another contributor to the aspirations in the region?
So first of all, I think if I had a message to Arab and Israeli youth, I think let us be the young people who will work together to build a bridge between our two nations and to show the world the model of inclusion, of peace, of tolerance, of love. Whether it's Islam and Judaism, whether it's Arab, the Arab region in Israel, or all descendants of Abraham. I think strong bridges are built through experiences together, and they're built by delving into understanding and appreciating one another's faiths, cultures, stories, traditions, symbols, history. And they're built by also engaging and learning about one another's dreams, fears, hopes. These learnings lead to innovation and partnerships that can unlock new solutions. On behalf of the UAE, I think building bridges between Emirati and Israeli youth is a top priority. And we did not waste any time delving into this unprecedented opportunity. And here's why. Youth have a fresh opportunity, Steve, to define what kind of world we want to live in. We're not unaware, but we don't bring the same grievances of our older generations. We can choose which values with which we want to shape the future. And what that means for the UAE and Israel as two of the region's strongest nations, now newly becoming friends and partners, is that we have an opportunity to demonstrate that peace is not merely a ceasefire, but it's a gateway to life, to a nation and region exponentially greater than when we are divided.
Let me just squeeze one last question in here. You oversee, I think, international youth exchange programs. And you know, when I grew up, international youth exchange programs were hugely important to my own kind of broadening of my awareness of things. I know you went to NYU Abu Dhabi. You had that experience, you know, in your university. How developed are these programs? Do you find other parts of the region trying to mimic some of the things the UAE is doing as a way to expose their youth to others? Just your quick thoughts on youth exchange.
First of all, youth exchange is so important. Just to let you know why in the UAE we believe the importance of that. Our world today is very different from our parents' and our grandparents' world, not only in the UAE, but I think for everyone. Exposure is key, and international exchanges are paramount to young people understanding a world beyond their own. And in my opinion, they're founded upon kind of the belief that if humans have created the world so far, we can create a better world. And the most important maybe difference today is our youth are growing up building a new world with the extra challenge of having to build a world that works. And that comes from participating in exchanges where you become more accepting, more tolerant, more open to learning new things, traits that contribute to educational experiences, to leadership potentials, to career trajectories. Personally, so much has impacted me from my experience at NYU, and the UAE is really on a mission to cultivate character in youth that builds their core values and capacity to thrive in a rapid globalized world. And they can't do that without exchange programs.
Well, I want to thank you, Minister Shamma Al-Mazrui. It's great to have this discussion with you, but I just want to tell our audience as you're listening, you know, we're talking to about a small dimension of these issues, and then many of the youth in the Arab world are having a tough time. They live in tough corners of that region. They see corruption in their governments. They have concerns across the board, but they also have very positive aspirations and hope, as the minister shared. And I'm so happy you brought that dose of realism to this discussion, because I think it's important that it's mixed out there, but we need to listen to the youth. So thank you so much. We're now